How to draw a chocolate lab. The reference image is in the description below. I always like to start with the eyes, of course, so I want to draw the outline. And then these eyes have more of a golden red color to them. So I apply a little bit of gold, a little bit of some rusty red in with the brown. Make sure you leave room for the highlights and the whites of the eye on the other side of the eye. So their two eyes look a little bit different because it's at an angle. So you kind of have to compensate when it comes to that to make sure that you're drawing them according to the reference image. And then once those two eyes are done, let's go ahead and move on to the left-hand side here. I always like to draw left to right because I'm right-handed. It prevents smudging. So the first layer is really just more about getting all of those details in terms of the colors and the highlights and the lowlights. Use a blend of darker colors for the lowlights and then blending into the midtones a little bit, and then use lighter colors for the highlights. Now, as you can see, I'm not really applying a lot of textured fur, but I am making sure that I have the lowlights and the highlights all blended well together. You'll see here in just a second how I actually apply those layers. So I start out with the first layer, usually something light, and then draw in the same direction as the fur that you see in the reference image. That's super important because with colored pencils, you can really see a lot of the texture of the pencil. So when you draw in the same direction, it's going to be a lot easier and make it look more natural. And I'm working on the eyebrow part too. It's really important to make sure that there's a little bit of that highlight in the top of the eye there, and then a little bit of the tuft of fur for the eyebrow itself. That way it gives a nice expression to this Labrador. Don't forget to apply lighter colors for the highlights too. Now to move on to the nose here, I'm applying a little bit of some purples and pinks, and then go on top with some darker browns and a little bit of black. Of course, the nostrils are straight up black, and they're not both even, so just make sure that you're drawing it according to the reference image more than just trying to make them look even. Noses have a lot of texture to it, but I'm actually going to make it look a little bit smooth and then apply my own texture afterwards. Moving on to the muzzle here, you could see that it's kind of like a firework effect where the fur has to kind of come up and out in both directions. And then I'm just really working on the coloring more than anything else. Then once you have that, you can apply lighter colors for the highlights just a little bit, and then start to add a little bit more detail later on. If you haven't noticed by now, I haven't been using a lot of brown. I actually kind of use a mix of gold, purple, a little bit of blues, and a dark sepia as well before I actually apply the brown, because there's a lot of colors that are actually involved in this kind of dog here. So I want to make sure that I'm getting all of those colors in before I really start to apply just the regular old brown. It also helps to apply a little bit of gray too for the midtones, and then you can use the darker brown for the low light areas, as well as using the light blue for the highlighted areas, and then a little bit of purple for the highlights too. I didn't do the ear just yet because I really didn't want to smudge it, so now we can actually do the ear, and I'm really focusing on just getting more of the colors from the highlights to the lowlights, more so than the actual texture. Texture is something that you really don't need to work on just yet until closer towards the end if you want to have a more smooth transition. I also really darkened the separation between the ear and the head here using a mix of black and dark sepia. It's super important to make sure it's not just straight up black and you're using a little bit of another color. That way it doesn't look very flat. So in this ear here, you can see that I am kind of blending in different ways, working section by section, because this ear does have quite a bit of a fold going on. So I really wanted to emphasize that as much as possible. And if you think this is really intimidating, don't be. It is completely okay. I was very intimidated by colored pencils when I first started for probably like the first year, so I totally understand. It's all about just keep going and working on the progress, and even when you think you're done, keep going. It really is all about just enjoying the process and learning from your mistakes. Now you can really start to see a good, nice fold happening, and I'm using a slice tool which kind of etches away to create a little bit of some highlights, which is a really good idea to have a good sense of direction for some of those little bits of fur. Okay, so let's move on to the mouth here. Now, of course, because it is at an angle, it's going to be a little bit challenging to draw this mouth. So you want to make sure you get that curve really nice before you start really adding any of those details. And of course, I'm not using black just yet for the mouth. I want to use darker colors and other different colors just to blend it and make sure that it's good to go before I really start to add the black. And because there's more texture here in this muzzle area, I wanted to kind of emphasize that more. So my first few layers, I did kind of draw more texture where the fur is kind of coming out and down like a waterfall kind of effect. And I think that was really helpful because not every single area in the dog has that kind of texture. So you want to make sure that you're seeing a smooth blend where it's supposed to be smooth, and then more texturized where it has more of that texture. Notice how every single layer that I applied, you can actually see, because I just really did more of the pattern here in the muzzle than just drawing more of working on the highlights, lowlights, and midtones. So that is important, but it doesn't have to be throughout the rest of the portrait. It can be very redundant and very time consuming to do so, but definitely pay attention to when it needs to be done and when it just needs to be a little bit more smooth texture. And then with the mouth here, it is fairly dark. I do kind of lighten it up just a little bit with the chin, but it is pretty much dark right where that mouth is. So this little part of the mouth is actually really important to make sure that you implement, because every single animal does have a key feature, and it makes it more look more like the actual pet than if you're just drawing a generalized animal. So make sure that you are paying attention to the key features, just like here with that little bit of the mouth kind of coming out. And now I'm back to just drawing more of a smooth texture, nothing too detailed. It's just really important to make sure that you have some details in some areas and then a little bit more smooth in others, especially if the pet has more of a out of focus effect, like where the neck and a little bit of the chest as well in that area. When it comes to some of these darker areas, your first couple layers can be a darker color. I usually suggest a lighter color, but when it's just super dark, you can still use a blend between light and dark colors. So your first layer can actually be a little bit more darker. That's completely okay. Still, once again, as long as you're drawing in the same direction as the fur that you see in the reference image, that's super, super important to remember. And then now you can actually kind of see that direction of the fur as I am building up those layers. And if, if you're kind of intimidated by, what colors are the next color to use, just kind of play around with different colors and see what works and what doesn't work. I use a variety of colors. As you can see, I actually use blues, purples, greens in this portrait here, which you really wouldn't think of, but play around with it and see what you come up with. When I first started, I just started with the basic kind of colors, browns, blacks, light and dark browns really, and a little bit of white, those kind of things, and it was just very flat looking. So the more colors, the more variety of colors that you have, the more realistic the portrait is actually going to look. I'm using mineral spirit oil to blend a little bit more. That's what the paintbrush is for. And what it does is it just really blends and kind of darkens up some areas, and then you can go back over it to apply more detail, and it actually kind of makes the color pencil a little bit more saturated and create a more smooth surface. So I really like to use that. All of that information is also in my color pencil material ebook, which is going to be linked below. So if you're interested in the materials I'm using, you can check that ebook out. If this video was helpful, please give it a like and subscribe, and check out the links below if you're wanting to learn to draw your own pet, or if you're just wanting to take some classes. Feel free to check it out. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.